Hello again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave and in this video we're going to be talking all about diminished chords. Why we're going to be doing that was because I was sent a question by Kennedy who asked this. Playing in the key of C major, what are diminished chords, how many of them are there in the key of C and how do you use them? Okay, well that's a really good question. Diminished chords, we don't play them as often. Major chords, minor chords crop up all the time. Diminished chords, maybe not so. Possibly because they have a slightly strange sound. That is a perfectly valid chord. I'll explain why. And I think a good starting point is we'll look at the chords that we get in the key of C major, and as a starting point we'll talk about triads. Triads are basically a three-note chord, as the name suggests, tri meaning three. And I'm not going to get too heavy into the theory of chord construction. I've done other videos about that. So if you want to understand a bit more about chord construction, the theory behind that, go and check out one of those videos. But if you look at the key of C major, what we can do is we can take every note in the key, and on that note, on each note, what we can do is take alternate notes from the key. On the starting point of C, you could take E and G, alternate notes from the C major scale, and that gives us the notes of a C major chord. We've got C, E, and G. C major. Do that on the next degree of the scale, D. Alternate notes on the C major scale would give you D, F, and A. It's a D minor chord. Different kind of sound because C will have a major chord, D will have a minor chord, and so on. Going right the way through the scale, we get D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. What's so special about the last chord that makes it diminished? The intervals on that last chord, the B diminished, we've got an interval of a minor third between the B and the D, 3 intervals, a minor third, but between the B and the F, that's only 6 semitones. It's not a perfect fifth, it's a semitone less. It's what we call a diminished fifth, and that's what gives the chord its name. Diminished chord is based on triad that has the formula 1, flat 3, flat 5. Like I say, it has a bit of a strange sound because you've got that diminished fifth. The diminished fifth is just a really, really strange sounding interval. If I just played that chord, you'd say that's wrong, that doesn't fit in. But if I play all the chords from the key of C major, sounds fine, doesn't it? That diminished triad leads in quite nicely to that C major. So in context, it's harmonious. So that's the function of a diminished chord in a major key. It's acting as the 7 chord. And like I say, if you want to know a bit more about the theory of chord construction, I have other videos. But for now, let's concentrate on the diminished chord. So, how would you use them? Well, you would use diminished chords the same way you would use major chords or minor chords. They're chords that belong to a key, and when you're building a chord progression, you say, I want a chord that's built on C. Say if you're playing in the key of C major, you want a chord that's built on C, you would use a C major chord. You want a chord that's built on E, you would use an E minor chord. If you want a chord that's built on B, you'd use a B diminished. And because it only contains notes that belong to the key of C major, it will fit in, it'll be harmonious. So there's nothing special or different about the way you'd use diminished chords. They have a little bit of an unusual sound. If you're not used to the sound of a diminished triad, maybe it's a little bit challenging, but they fit in. So if you want to introduce a chord into a progression that's got a little bit more interest, a little bit of spice to it, a diminished chord's possibly a good way to go about that because it's got an interesting, slightly unusual sound, but it still fits in with the key. What I want to look at now is taking those triads and taking them the next step and introducing a 7th degree. So we use alternate notes on the scale to give us triads. Let's go to the next alternate note to give us a 7th chord. Going back to the key of C major, these are the triads that we've got available. If we add the next but one note to each of these, we end up with these chords. So we've got C major 7 on the 1st degree, D minor 7th on the 2nd degree, E minor 7, F major 7, G dominant 7th, A minor 7, and then on the 7th degree we've got what we call a B half diminished. It's an important distinction between different types of diminished chords, because when we extend beyond the triad, there's different types of diminished chord. The diminished chord in the key of C major gives us a B diminished, but to keep it harmonious with the key of C major, when we add on the flat 7th degree, which is what we have here, we have an A, and that gives us B half diminished 7th chord. So it sounds a bit weird on its own, but if you play it in context, yeah, it sounds fine. It's using the same approach to building that half diminished 7th chord on the 7th degree as we used for building the major 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7th on the other degrees of the scale, so it fits in. As I say, that's a half diminished chord, minor 7 flat 5. It's not a fully diminished chord, that's something else, we'll come to that in a second. For now though, let's look at where we might find diminished chords other than in the key of C major. So we've seen B diminished as the 7th chord of C major, but chord harmonization is transferable, transposable across all the keys, so any major key, the 7th chord is going to be a diminished chord. So if you're playing in the key of C major, it's B diminished. If you're playing in the key of G major, it's going to be F sharp diminished. If you're playing in the key of D major, it's going to be C sharp diminished, and so on, right the way around the circle it fits. Looking at other types of scale, if you look at the natural minor scale, now the natural minor is basically derived from the major scale. So if we look at the key of C major and take the 6th degree, which is A natural minor is the relative natural minor of C major. So the chords of A minor are basically the same chords as we get in C major, but they start and finish in a different place. So rather than going from C, D, E, we're starting on an A minor. And the second triad in the key of A natural minor is B diminished. So a diminished triad functions as the 7th chord in a major key or as the 2 chord in a natural minor. And likewise, if you extend into 7th chords the way that we did in the key of C major, and we had a half diminished chord on the 7th degree, you would have a half diminished chord on the 2nd degree in a natural minor. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, rewind the video and watch it back. Pause where necessary on those diagrams. Hopefully it should all make sense. A couple of other scale types that we'll look at. Let's take a look at the harmonic minor. Harmonic minor is interesting. It's like a natural minor, but the harmonic minor has got a natural 7th, whereas the natural minor has got a flat 7. So that changes the chordal harmony. Looking at the chords we've got in the harmonic minor, harmonize that out in triads. And if we're looking for diminished chords, we've got diminished triads on the 2nd and 7th degrees. Interestingly, if we extend those triads to include 7th degree, we've still got a half diminished chord on the 2nd degree, but on the 7th degree we have what we call a fully diminished chord. Different formula there. It's still 1 flat 3 flat 5 because it's based on a diminished triad, but it's got a flat 7, a double flat 7th degree. Comparing the sound, then, a half diminished chord has got the formula 1 flat 3 flat 5 flat 7. Whereas a fully diminished chord, a diminished chord has the formula 1 flat 3 flat 5 double flat 7, enharmonically equivalent to a natural 6th, but and it sounds like this. So half diminished, diminished. You hear the difference there? Your ear, I think, naturally gets drawn to that that flat 5, the interval between the root and the flat 5th. It's such a unusual dissonant interval, but there is a subtlety there, the difference in sound between the half diminished and the fully diminished chord. One thing I'll just quickly point out about the diminished chord is if you look at the intervals between the notes, between the root and the flat third degree, there's an interval of 3 semitones. Between the flat third and the flat fifth degree, interval of 3 semitones, and between the flat fifth and the double flat 7th degree, there's an interval of 3 semitones. That means if you played a chord shape like this, let's look at a B diminished chord, B, D, F, A flat. That chord there is a B diminished chord. We're based on a B is the root note. We've got a D, an F and an A flat. But you could say that that is actually also, that shape works as a D diminished chord because we've got a D, an F, an A flat and a B. Those are the notes of a D diminished chord. It could also be the same shape that we use for an F diminished chord, F, A flat, B and D, or an A flat diminished chord, A flat, B, D and F. So just something to bear in mind when you're looking at the chord shape. If once you've learned the shape for one diminished chord, you actually know the shape for 4. Also, we could take a look at the melodic minor. Melodic minor is basically like think of it as a major scale, but with a flat third. And we harmonise that out in triads. There's a diminished triad on both the 6th degree and the 7th degree. Extend those out to include the 7th degree, and we end up with half diminished chords. There's no diminished chords in the melodic minor when we extend to include the 7th degree. 6th and 7th degree both extend out to half diminished. So that's where we find diminished chords. Like I say, we can use a diminished chord. You could extend them out to 7th degrees or include 9th degrees. All the different extensions. Anything you could do with a major chord or a minor chord, you could do it with a chord that's built on a diminished triad, as long as when you're harmonising it, you respect the key that you're in and you use diatonic notes and so on. And you would use a diminished chord, like I say, in the same way you would use a major or a minor chord. It's a chord built on a degree, so when you're building progressions, you want a chord built on the degree with a diminished triad, well, use a diminished chord. But all the discussion there is about how the chords fit into the key when we use them diatonically. So we only use chords where all the notes fit into the key. They can be really useful, those outside or borrowed chords. Say I'm playing in the key of C major and I want to just take a chord progression down from E minor 7 to D minor 7 to C major 7. That chord progression works. It's a bit safe. I mean, it's interesting enough. It's extended at 7th chords. It's got a bit of flavour. But if I wanted to add a bit of spice, what I could do, start at E minor 7, go to E diminished. Sounds a bit weird. It sounds odd. It doesn't fit into the key. It sounds dissonant. That's fine. That's what I want. I want a chord that sounds outside, and the listener's going to want the progression to move on and do something different. So that gives me that. Then I can go to D minor 7, D diminished, and then finish on C major 7. So I've got 3 completely comfortable, safe, happy diatonic chords and 2 outside chords, but put them together. You hear how you're getting that balance between an inside chord that belongs to the key and then an outside chord that doesn't, and it drives the progression on. So that's just one fairly simple example. There's loads and loads of different ways you could use diminished chords as borrowed chords. But getting into that it's a whole other rabbit hole to get down. I want to try and keep this video at a manageable sort of length, just kind of make you aware of the idea of using them as outside chords. Where you would want to use them, what context? Well, it's up to you. Whatever sounds good. Music theory is a set of rules that you can then use as a guide. But at the end of the day, you let your ears tell you if something works or something doesn't. They're really useful if you want to make a jazz progression or a blues progression sound a bit more interesting. You know, blues, especially if you think about it, the blues scale's got the flat fifth degree in it, that flat five and a diminished chord. It sort of lends itself to a bluesy sort of sound. Diminished chords and altered chords that have a diminished triad in them, you get them so often in jazz. But even think something like a metal context. If you think that, you know, that interval of a diminished fifth, you know, that one flat five, can be a real metal interval. So you think about using diminished chords in metal if you want something that sounds a bit more creative and just want to get away from just using basic power chords or whatnot. If you understand music theory, it helps you to kind of navigate your way through these things. So use that as a guide and an experiment. So hopefully that's shed a bit of light on what diminished chords are, where we find them, how you can use them. Kennedy, I did give you a really quick answer by email, but hopefully that's explained it in a bit more detail. I realised there was a lot of music theory in there. If you haven't been able to keep up, hey, there's plenty other music theory videos on the channel. If you go back and have a look at those, say about chord construction, I think there's some videos there about chord substitutions and borrowed chords and altered chords and chord extensions, loads of different things. So plenty there to keep you entertained and busy and experimenting. Okay, I hope you found that useful and interesting. If you did, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see other videos that I post on the channel, then please click subscribe, which is also down there, and click the bell icon. That way you get notified anytime I upload any new videos onto the channel. You're welcome to leave a comment. I don't always get notified by YouTube when people leave comments though, so if there's something specific you want to ask me, whether it's about music theory, guitar playing, guitar gear, anything at all, you're better off going here, fill that form in, send your question in. That way it comes direct to me if you use that form, and I can get around to answering it in a future video. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.